Everything that you say in your mind is presented as truth. It's not up for negotiation. If it's in your head and it's telling you, you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're not successful enough, you're not smart enough, it's true. It's just true until you unpack it and choose something different.
What's so beautiful about that is we do that subconsciously. We don't go, let me just forever believe I'm not enough, and that will negatively impact my first marriage, second, nobody does that.
We have a very chatty voice in there. So if we say to fear, no, I ignore you, that's a lot like a little kid pulling on your pant leg, going, mom, mommy, mom, mommy, mom, mommy, mom, mom, mommy, mom, mom, mommy, mom, mommy, mom, mom. People pleasers are liars. They're a bunch of liars. They're just saying what you want to hear. And I'm guessing that if I asked you, what kind of people do you want to attract into your life? You're not like, a bunch of liars. Start looking at, with whom do I chronically complain about the things that they are doing? Who is that person? Because let me tell you what, if you're pissed at your boss, your partner is probably getting an earful. If you can't stand something your mom did, then it's probably your sister who's getting an earful. And if it's worth chronically complaining about, then it's probably worth taking action on.
I always try to operate from the mantra of don't let your silence make you a liar. If there's something that you are...
Ooh.
Tweet it, everybody, tweet it.
Wow. Production, I need a pen. Take a note.
Stand up for yourself without being a dick. You don't have to be rude, mean, malicious, acrimonious in order to be assertive, to get your point across. Consistently placing everybody else in front of ourselves, that sends a subconscious message to our mind that we don't matter as much. Their emotions matter more. Putting everybody ahead of you always is poison disguised as nobility. We need to bolster in that belief that we actually matter, that how I feel matters, that I am worthy and I'm deserving of happiness, and that deserves a voice.
Well, I would say there's so many different avenues that have been a massive piece of where I am today. But I think probably the most pivotal story that relates greatly to what I do now and sort of the message that I talk about now happened about 12 years ago. It was when my father passed away. And a bit of context, I grew up in a very, very conservative, born-again Christian family. And I have since realized that there were a lot of dogmatic and almost cult-like things that I was raised with. And as I've been able to kind of unpack that, I've seen it in a very different light than what a lot of people think of as the Christian faith. And so I grew up in sort of this extreme, very militant upbringing in many ways, like scholastically and home environment and church and all of those things. And my father and I were extremely close. He passed away in 2007. And both of my brothers, I have two younger brothers, and they had both done jail time, had trouble with the law, never went to college or university. And, I had been working since I was 14. I put myself through college. I got married when I was 20. I moved out of the house and had sort of my own life. And despite all of that, my mom really kind of lumped me in with my brothers as somewhat of a delinquent simply because I wasn't walking with the Lord. I wasn't a part of the faith that she ascribed to. So the day of my father's viewing, essentially, of his service, I, at the time, had a background in makeup artistry. So I knew very clearly that I was going to perform his makeup for his viewing. So essentially mortuary makeup on my dead father. And in addition to that, I knew that I really wanted to speak at the service. And because of his work and because of the impact that he had in the world, there were hundreds of people at this service. And I wasn't as equipped to speak to large groups, and especially not one that was so far from my own personal set of values and faith at that time. And it was a very trying day, to say the very least. So that same day, I get back to my mom's house after the service, and she feels that it's very much the opportune time to tell me that she feels like they failed as parents. After I just did my dead father's makeup, after I just spoke to this group, the child who had really made something of herself and never put you through those sleepless nights of, oh my gosh, they're in trouble with the law. And the only thing that I could really muster in that moment, also being consumed with my own grief, I kind of looked at her and just was like, you probably shouldn't say that to a child, and she was like, well, that's just how I feel because you're not walking with the Lord. And I kind of was like, wow, taken aback. And that was a very pivotal moment for me, because although I had started my process with getting involved with personal development, that was when I really realized that there were going to be times when speaking up for myself and choosing me meant that I might have to have some collateral damage, that there might be situations that are actually an ultimatum, that if it came down to, I either make you happy or I make me happy, I choose me. And the trajectory thereafter was really fascinating, because I went through a phase where I was extremely combative and adversarial, and I wanted to argue, and I wanted to talk about gay rights, and I wanted to talk about global warming, and I wanted to talk about all these things that I knew were in direct opposition to my mom. Let's talk about astrology. And I wanted to inflict pain, and I was coming from a place of my own pain. And then gradually, as I started flexing this new muscle of speaking up for myself, it got far, far less combative. And I realized that there was a way to be extremely articulate, to be very affirmative and assertive, but to do that with the utmost grace and kindness. And that really has been the evolution. That was the impetus. But now that's what I do, and that's what I teach people how to do, is to, first of all, really have that internal belief that your voice matters, that you're valuable, that you're enough, that you are worthy. And then the external piece of, well, what does that sound like then, as far as tough conversations, saying no, speaking up for yourself, and boundaries? Like, what does that actually sound like to ask an adult child to move out of the house, or to ask your spouse for a divorce, or to tell your family that you are coming out of the closet, or that you don't align with the religion you were raised under? So like really challenging topics that we kind of just hide behind these social phrases that we have, like don't rock the boat and don't open up a can of worms. And so that really is kind of my journey. And now I'm so happy to say that my mom and I have a great relationship. However, a lot of it has had to be very surface level, because the things that are of grave value to each one of us are in direct opposition. So we've kind of had to navigate, well, what does that look like if neither one of us are persuading the other to be different? So the thing that happens, I think, far more often than not, is that we allow ourselves to misname the emotion that we're feeling. So if we talk about guilt and what it's designed to do, it is designed to reroute poor behavior, right? So if I go out and slap somebody across the face for no reason, I should experience an emotion of guilt, because that was kind of a dipshit mean thing to do, right? And so I should be flooded with a conscience that says, hey, feel guilty about that. That wasn't correct. However, we allow ourselves to call it guilt in situations where we've actually done nothing wrong. So a perfect, like an extreme example would be somebody coming out of the closet, feeling as though they cannot stand in their own authenticity, because by virtue of sharing that with their family, there will be hurt, there will be pain. Now, saying, I feel guilt, you haven't done anything wrong in that situation, right? So one of the things that I tell people to do if they struggle with guilt is to start renaming that emotion. So the first element is to notice, and I actually have a little acronym for it, which is NAC, N-A-C. So the N is for notice and name. So obviously you would name the emotion. I feel guilty right now. Ask is the A. Ask yourself, have I done anything wrong according to me? Because a lot of times we say, have I done anything wrong? Well, yeah, mom's going to think I've done something wrong. My coworker's going to think I've done my executive is going to think, yes. But according to me, have I done something unbefitting of my character? And if the answer is no, then we need to rename that guilt. And I'll give you a couple of suggestions in a second. But the final piece of the acronym is C, which is choose. And that's to be very vigilant about your choice of behavior, like to not go people please, to not go lie about cleaning up something that you really don't need to go clean up. And also choosing your own self-talk and choosing that you are allowed to give voice to your wants and needs. The things that you care about in this world are equally as important as everybody else's. So what I suggest as a substitute for guilt is to say things like, I feel concerned, I feel empathy, I feel sympathy, I feel uncomfortable, I feel a lot of love towards that person. So I think if we can start untangling guilt, because it really is only warranted if you've actually done something wrong according to you. So that's one piece of kind of awareness around that. Your other question of, well, how do we speak up for ourselves, right? Like, how do we stand up for ourselves? Well, I happen to teach like a 12-week course. So I'm going to try to distill this down into some key little nuggets. One of the biggest ways that I use for myself is just to commit to this mantra of not allowing my silence to make me a liar. And what I mean by that is to not allow any situation where I feign my compliance when I don't really believe something, or I am really offended by something, or out of integrity, I just can't stay quiet. I had a situation, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I do community theater in my spare time, and I was doing a theater show, and there was a guy who was there with me, and he showed me this meme on his phone, and it was clear he thought it was hilarious, but it was extremely disparaging about a child with mental and physical disabilities, which to me is not a laughing matter. And so in that moment, I'm faced with the decision of the easy way, which is to go, ha, 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 and not say anything, or to take the brave step and go, you know what, actually, I find that really offensive. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't show me those things in the future, which is what I chose to do. And so I knew in that instant that my silence would make me a liar. So that is one element that I would say anybody watching, look in your life. Where has your silence made you complicit with something that you don't believe in, that you don't ascribe to, that is against your own ethical and moral code? And maybe who are those key players where you tend to silence yourself? Usually they are the people that we deem an authority figure, or sometimes more often than not, it's family, people that we're really close with. And something that you mentioned earlier, I think is really important. I like to call it gearing up. And that's the preparation for a conversation, or, to say no, or to have a boundary instilled. And one of the best ways to do that is to get out on paper what it is that you want to share, what it is that you want to say. Well, with what you're saying, especially if that's your tendency and your pull to, your gut response is yes, yes, yes. In fact, we've heard the term the yes man. I used to have a friend in California who called it being the totally girl, right? So in California, which is where I'm originally from, like, totally, I'll do that for you, no problem. And you're right, it's oftentimes to a sacrifice of self. And one of the things that I think is really key is analyzing what happened earlier in your day. So even if you, at the very end of your day, can look in hindsight and go, did I have any gut responses where I said yes or I overcommitted to something? And then I would suggest doing what I like to call declaring the do-over, where you say, okay, the next time I'm presented with that request, maybe it's a friend who wants you to help them move, or maybe it's a project at work or something collaborative that's going to cost you a lot of time and energy. You can look at yourself and go, okay, wait a minute. Is there any way that I could actually go to that person and say, hey, you know what? I think I committed a little too quickly. I would hate to pull out last minute or leave you hanging. I don't know if I'm going to be able to come through the way you really need me to, and that's not fair to you. And I wanted to give you as much notice as possible. Now, some stuff you can't always pull out, but I think there are a lot of things that we think, well, I didn't say something before, so now I have to. And it's like, no. You can go clean it up. You can say something different. What I would suggest as far as saying no is I would start to condition buying yourself some time in any kind of way. So the minute somebody asks something of you, to have a go-to phrase like, how soon do you need an answer? Throwing it back on them, right? Or, you know what, I am going to need to check my calendar. Can I get back to you tomorrow? Or even at the very minimum, can you hold that thought? I need to run to the restroom real quick. Like if you can't think of anything, I don't give a shit what you say, just don't say yes. But create a statement, your go-to statement. And then one of my favorites, if somebody is presenting their information as totally emergent and urgent, and it isn't to you, and they're like, I really need an answer right now, then I will say, you know what, unfortunately, if you need an answer right away, I'm going to have to politely decline. Boom. My favorite line to use. I truly hope that you can understand. But as you can see, like the delivery is not bitchy. It's not rude. It's not mean. It's cloaked in kindness and love, but it's also very affirmative. And people appreciate that. They really do. We don't want a bunch of inauthentic liars around us. We want people who tell us the truth about things and say, no, I'm not available, or I'm not able to come to that. Please invite me in the future. I'm just not able this weekend. People really do value that versus overloading yourself and then having to pull out the last minute or being grumpy the entire time. Usually what happens, so let's say it's somebody who overcommitted with friendships or they overcommitted with work. Guess who hears about it? Probably your partner, probably your kids get the brunt of that. That energy of being bitter that you had to shut down your voice there, it'll come out somewhere, right? It can come out as disease and ailments. It can come out as malice towards people that you love who are kind of unassuming. So yeah, there really is. There's a cost to saying yes chronically over and over again. So yeah, come up with a phrase. So as far as boundaries, I really feel that there are three major elements to establishing boundaries. And it really, just to distill that down, what the hell does that even mean? What is a boundary? Boundary is simply a choice about something that you will no longer tolerate. That's it. It's very easy. Delivering boundaries, though, are extremely challenging. So I feel like there's three steps. The first is to decide really clearly on what is the boundary. The second is to deliver it. And that has everything to do with your communication skills and how you broach the conversation to begin with. And then possibly the most challenging that most people don't prepare for is the enforcement of the boundary. And that's when the person breaches the boundary that you've established, and you thought just by telling them, and because you were all worked up and you finally had the guts to sit down and tell them what you had to tell them, and you thought, okay, great, the hard work's done. And then they breach the boundary. And you're like, shit, now what do I do? And you have to reinforce and go back and say, hey, remember when I said such and such? So I'll give you an example. I had a colleague that I worked with many years ago, and her in-laws would tell her, if you bring the kids to stay with us, we're going to have them baptized into our religion. And her and her husband were like, that's not how we want to raise our children. We really would love for you to spend time with them. You mean so much to us. That's just not something that we want. But over and over again, her mother-in-law would threaten that. So a very specific boundary in that situation would be, here's the deal. We love you so much and we want our children to connect with you. It's not something that we're comfortable with. And it also feels kind of like a disrespectful move for you to not care about the way in which we want to raise our children. I'm sure that's extremely challenging for you to understand, given how much your faith means to you. But we have really kind of drawn the line in the sand, and we're asking very specifically that you don't bring up anything related to baptism or religion when the kids are with you. And so that's another piece, is being very specific about what you're asking for, so that you know if it's been breached or not. Because you can't just say something ambiguous like, we just need you to respect us more. Well, what does that mean? What exactly does that look like? But if you say specifically, don't mention anything related to your religion, don't mention anything related to baptism, and then you don't necessarily have to give an ultimatum at that point, but you need to be prepared for that in the future of, if this gets breached, and how many times, how many chances do they get? And then what would we do? Right. So then you deliver it, in a similar fashion, which is why it's important to gear up and visualize what you're going to say and how you're going to do it, practice it. Then let's say the kids report back that grandma told us about this story of, in this religion or this baptism situation. And so you go, God damn it, now I have to go and reinforce this boundary again. And that's where you have to really decide, how many times am I going to give them this chance, right? But you have to do that, because if you don't enforce it, they go psychologically, the tendency is to think, she didn't mean it. They didn't mean it. They were just throwing their weight around. They don't really mean it, because you're showing them that you'll tolerate it still. So you have to say, hey, remember when we had that tough conversation about religion? I really need you to hear me, that this is really of grave importance to us. And if it happens again, we're going to have to only have get-togethers at our place. And that pains us to do that. I think there's an alternative way, but we really need you to meet us halfway on this. So that's sort of what it would sound like. Yeah. So there's an example of boundaries. Not easy.
I love it. And how many chances do you give someone though?
That really, really depends. I think if it's in your immediate household, that's when you like a spouse, things like that, you have to get really clear about, how much longer into the future am I going to allow this? Like, could I be happy if nothing changes? Am I going to be okay in a year, in 5 years? Sometimes it's about really giving yourself a date. And it really, really depends on the nature of the relationship and how severe, or how, I guess I should say, how important the issue is to you. And what it costs you by waiting around for them to get the hint and actually respect you back.